Welcome, everyone. The topic for today with the EMCoP presentation is using AI tools for creative process. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. The UBC Vancouver is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands, which we call home, work, sleep, and play. Something we'd like to mention right off the bat is that the Emerging Media Community of Practice, the short version is EMCoP, was initiated at UBC under the Emerging Media Lab, which is EML. And if you'd like to learn more about EML, you can visit the website, which will be put into the chat. And EMCoP is also a website we'd like you to peruse through. And you can also see upcoming events. Everything will be posted there, as well as any event rights for future events that we're holding. And the Emerging Media Community of Practice is a collaborative group of researchers, developers, designers, and educators who are committed to building a community of practice focused on, developing emerging media technologies for the human good. So a couple of reminders for today. We have two sections where you can post. This is a webinar, so we won't be having video or raising hands or anything. But if you have a question, even you can type it in while someone is speaking. That's in the Q&A section. And we encourage you to both ask questions and use the chat. The chat is for side conversations. So if you keep those separate, we'll be monitoring the Q&A portion for sure. And we want to get your questions to the presenters at the very end. We'll have about 20 minutes for questions, a Q&A section at the end. So we'd like to start today off with a quick poll. And you don't have to participate, but it would be great for us if you could. And the question is, as a participant today, which of the following option applies the most to you? So that we realize there may be more than one, but just select the one that applies to you the most. That will be very helpful for us. So we appreciate your feedback on that. And as we're doing that, and we can post these for everyone to see. So we've got working in the selection options are interested member of the public, which is at 17%, student, working in academia or retired academic, working in the industry. That could be AI, or you're a creative who's using AI, or and then we have other. So okay, while that is happening, what I would like to do is we're going to just display a transition slide here for, as I introduce Dr. Ben Carpenter van Barthold. He, as an experienced artist and educator, Dr. Ben Carpenter van Barthold has demonstrated aptitude for leadership in both the academic and artistic world. His accomplishments as an artist include receiving the Jerwood Sculpture Prize 2001, as well as exhibiting at the Venice Biennale in 2005. For those of you who aren't aware, that's a big show. He is a principal lecturer in fine art at Nottingham Trent University in the UK, and a non-executive director at ViewNight, where he is part of a team using AI to construct an innovative community marketplace for creative individuals and collectors alike. So welcome very much. Ben, it's okay if we go with the informal?
Of course.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that generous introduction. So I'm going to talk briefly about my background, my experience of working on a project which uses AI for creative practice, and then come to some questions that I've been pondering as an educator in the arts, which I hope to share some thoughts with you. And it would be good to hear from those of you who are on the call, either through the Q&A or subsequently, if you're interested, if you work in that area, if you work in creative art and design, and to have a longer conversation about this stuff. But as Lolita has mentioned, I'm an artist and I lead Fine Art at NTU, which is a large comprehensive university in the East Midlands of the United Kingdom, with one of the largest undergraduate art schools in the UK. And I got involved with, through a government-backed knowledge exchange project with a technology company based in Birmingham that has created two other companies called ViewNight and Viewtopia, where I now serve as a non-executive director for culture. Now, these two separate companies have got a linked mission and a linked project, which is broadly conceived to unlock creativity and remove barriers to participation in the arts, both for creatives and for viewers. The problem that needs addressing is that the art world is one of the most gated parts of our economy. It's very hard for creatives to enter the art market, and it's even harder, in some ways, for the general public to access, because it's often commercial art spaces are very off-putting. They're more off-putting than haute couture. They just feel like weird spaces that aren't built for ordinary folk. And there's another dimension to that, which in some ways is even more insidious and problematic, even though it's not really a commercial problem. And that's in between school and adulthood, something happens to our innate creativity. Children, play and express themselves in a very natural way. You will not find a child who says they cannot draw, but you'll struggle to find an adult who says they can. So what is that shift about? What happens there? Something happens between childhood and adulthood that stops people from being creative, and that's a problem. To put some figures around those claims that I've made, in 2017, 25 artists accounted for nearly 50% of all contemporary auction sales globally, 25 individuals. Now, bearing in mind that you already have to be an incredibly successful artist to have something sold at auction, that tells you what it means about, we really do have a winner takes it all economy in the art world. And in the UK, there's a report which has just been published by Artist Newsletter that has got a profane title, so I can't tell you what it's called, but it expresses the anger of the organization. And it highlights a culture of low fees and unpaid labor, with key findings including a median hourly rate paid to artists in the United Kingdom of £2.60, which is absolutely shocking. And most practicing artists make about a third of their income directly from, their own work. So there's a problem there. And add to that the fact that we know from research that engagement with art for everybody has positive health benefits. And you get the full scale of what is lost through the highly dysfunctional, extremely vertical, extremely gated art economy that we have, not just in the United Kingdom, but I think across the world. So the solution to that problem, which ViewNight and Viewtopia are seeking to address, is to pair a special kind of digital screen with an innovative marketplace, and to build a recommendation engine which will have a new model for how artists can receive revenue. And in doing this, we're doubly breaking down those barriers, because we're addressing the barriers to the artists in entering the art market, and also barriers for the general public in accessing art and culture, because it's a consumer product that will go into people's homes. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and you can get a picture of what I'm talking about. It was so much more fluid when I did that in rehearsal. There we go. So here you can see the ViewNight app, which is in beta, and an image showing the Textura canvas on the wall behind the image there, to give you a sense of what the product looks like. And there are several applications, several aspects of this product which use AI, which are kind of under the hood, that are quite hidden from the user. So there's an AI that's being developed for categorization of artworks by style, and another which categorizes artworks for their traits, in particular their biophilic traits. By biophilic, I mean the likelihood that the image will promote a sense of connection with nature, which we know has also got strong therapeutic benefits. The other prong of the solution is an app called Viewtopia. This is fully live, so I wouldn't encourage you to have a look at the View Night app right now. That's going to be live in June. It's going to go alpha in June. Viewtopia is live now. Viewtopia is a generative AI for the creation of images based on art styles. But what's different about this is that it's got an emphasis on texture, and we've developed an algorithm. The engineers have developed an algorithm that captures a sense of human movement and gesture, like brushstrokes, basically. And that's a little distinctive because most models are trained to develop images by pixel. And this leads to a rather odd kind of fractal effect that you might be familiar with if you've used Midjourney, because I've played around with lots of different image generators, and they all do this to an extent, but I think it's particularly noticeable on some of the Midjourney images where stuff in the background is just as detailed as stuff in the foreground, because it's being treated with a kind of evenness that you do not get with photography, and you certainly do not get with painting or drawing. And we are using this. We developed this app as a kind of, in a way, it's an on-ramp for people who are completely shut out of creativity to start to express themselves. And there's an educational element to it as well, because the styles have been built around, the art historically informed. The taxonomy that we've developed is art historically informed. And on the far right of the screen, you can see that if you pick, say, the Baroque as your style, there are some notes which come up so that it's got that kind of contextualizing aspect to it. So I'm going to unshare my screen now and go back to my main flow. So that solution that I talked about to the problem is, yes, it's a commercial solution. It's a profit-making organization, but the split for artists is 90%, and that compares with an industry standard of about 50 or 60% take from a commercial gallery. Now, as an arts educator, having worked on this AI project, I've drawn some questions from it, and which I've been thinking about, and that's what I really want to focus on now in the second part of my presentation. Suddenly, right, generative AI has gone from being nowhere to everywhere. And that's prompted me to wonder what new literacies art education should promote, what the future of arts practice looks like, and wondering whether there are less visible but potentially more powerful applications of AI that artists need to know about. Should we really be that hung up on generative AI, or is there other forms of machine learning that could be more useful? So to begin with the literacies, working in creative art and design, it's clear to me that the world of tech, and having worked with a technology company, that moves so much quicker than higher education. And the reaction I'm seeing in art schools generally is one of catching up. So we're worried about plagiarism. We're not getting ahead of the curve. Generative AI is a creative tool for ideation, for kicking ideas around, spitballing, and that sort of thing. But at the moment, the exposure that our students have to it is like that of a consumer to a product. So really, they're choosing between different flavors of generative AI, and that's like picking whether you like Coke or Pepsi. It's not very meaningful. What our students need to be doing is getting higher up that chain. And to do that, they're going to need to be supported. I'm going to use photography as an example here. If you were after an image to illustrate a website or a product or something like that, you would have headed over to Shutterstock. And up until about 6 months ago, you'd have licensed work from a living photographer. Well, now you're quite likely to use their generative AI. And similarly, there are generative tools now embedded in Photoshop, and there's Adobe Firefly just around the corner. If my business was creating photographs to illustrate, for instance, menus or websites or anything like that, any of the kind of stuff that Shutterstock used to serve, I'd be worried about my livelihood. So how can we address that for photography students who are in creative HE right now? What I feel those students need to be able to access are expertise to help them put together a data set to train their own models. I see there being, the future of employment for people who are working like that will be to sell not discrete images, but a sort of scalable vision. And to do that, we are going to have to employ more, not necessarily academics. There are lots of academics in HE who are researching AI, but technicians, people who can, in the same way as we have technicians to help with stretching a canvas or working with plaster, we need technicians in art schools who can work with data. The second thing I want to look at is the future of arts practice. Now, I've got a feeling that it's going to be all about, the next 20 years, it's going to be all about content and authenticity. What I mean by this is it's going to be about content, because as we move towards a more digital native economy and new platforms are built, there's going to have to be something to go on those platforms. But I feel that there's also a different kind of content that's needed, something which is more personalized to the viewer. Gamers already don't really want to use the off-the-shelf avatar in Fortnite or any of those other games. They want to be able to dress in the same way as, we pick our own clothes in real life. And for that reason, companies like Balenciaga have already moved into that space and are selling trainers that you can take into gaming environments, and not just one set of trainers per game by using blockchain technology and creating NFTs. They're taking them from one game to the other, so the trainers travel with the consumer. Nike is using NFTs in a similar way to unlock special content and to create sort of richer, more immersive experiences for their consumer. Now, that's already been very much embraced within fashion, and fashion is an important part of the art and design picture. It's not necessarily my particular neck of the woods, so I'm interested in fine art. But even in that space, we can already see token-gated inclusion in creative projects. So artists are experimenting with something called DAOs and generative art projects, which help the collector or consumer to personalize the work that the artist is making. So one of the things I think is really important for us to be talking about to our students is the sort of combination between, on the one hand, a kind of scalability, where you're going to have, from my first example, the photographer who's training a model in order to create potentially thousands of images with clients which share their vision, but also personalization. And those two things will come together and will involve an intersection of generative AI on the one hand and blockchain on the other. As I see it, I think that's quite a sort of likely development. But it's also going to be all about content in another sense, because to me, this moment we're living through feels a little bit like 1994 all over again, the early days of the internet. And what happened was we moved very quickly from that kind of utopian space where we were going to be freely sharing information in some kind of giant hippie love-in, to it being kind of incredibly vertical. And, we've got Twitter being owned by a single billionaire. So we've gone from utopia to a rather, well, I'm going to go with dystopia, really. And along the way, there was, of course, BitTorrent and Napster nearly killed the music industry. So if we're facing a similar moment, what creatives need to get a handle on are what the opportunities and challenges of Web3 are, and also generative AI. And I see, now there's going to be a lot of academics on the call, and academics have to put their stuff through ethics committees, and we're not necessarily motivated by profit. And certainly ViewNight and Viewtopia are distinct from what I'm about to say, because we have an art-first policy. But a lot of generative AI is developed by co-opting the past creativity of others without recompense. And that's, really quite problematic, and it's quite a bad look. And the dangers here for artists don't need to be spelled out. But I think that there are broader cultural dangers as well, because as it gets harder to distinguish between the generative, the hallucinatory, and the real, and all of that is happening against a kind of post-truth backdrop, we're going to have to develop new tools for navigating what is authentic and what is inauthentic, and we're going to have to get smarter about what we mean by that. One solution to that, as I see for artists, and something I'd like us to be talking more to our students about, is to use decentralized tech again to borrow from the title of Edward Lee's new book, enable creators to take control. And this is about much, much more than just using NFTs to establish provenance or to track ownership, because I think it's also about capturing the narrative of creation in a much fuller manner and foregrounding the human component in creativity. There is, I see in a lot of the chat on Twitter and Discord, a lot of the kind of communities that have built around generative AI, there is a kind of arrogant misconception that these technologies are really going to lead to the death of the author, the final, to borrow from Roland Barthes. And I just want to dwell on this for a moment, because it's not a view that I share. I mean, ultimately, art is not just representative of the real world in the sense that it can be mimetic, it's doubly symbolic, because it is symbolic in the sense that it represents the inner world and also the biography of the artist who made the work. That's what people access when they look at an artwork. It's a fragment of that whole artist's biography of their career. And in a way, it also intimates a kind of something which is even larger than that, which is the human potential of the creative who made it. Now, a purely Gen AI image cannot work like that, because it doesn't have that second order of symbolic representation. It's a statistical model. It's what Emily Bender and others have dubbed a stochastic parrot. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm against generative AI at all. On the contrary, I think it's a really exciting tool, and I think it can be used as a rail into a deeper and more creative life, but it's not going to replace artists. One of the things we need to be working with students is to, I think, tell them that, to reassure them of that, but also to teach them about IP and to teach them how to tell the fuller story of their creativity and point them towards some of the emerging tools that can help them to do that. For instance, using blockchain to notarize creation stories or to create authentic fingerprinted images that can be securely tracked back to their creator. Now, this takes me to my final point, I'm nearly done, which is about the less visible uses of AI. So as there's more and more content comes on stream and more creatives come online, there will be a need for curation. And this is where I see AI playing probably a more important role in the art world than image generation, because content recommendation engines, I think, could be a really interesting way to connect art market marginalized artists with art world marginalized consumers in a way that really could be radically disruptive to what, as I said in the beginning, is one of the most horrendously vertical and gated parts of our economy, and that currently is serving very few other than a small number of extremely successful actors. So to summarize, I think art schools need to skill up in technical expertise around data encoding so that creatives can create their own models. I think we need to actively teach IP and IP management to our students, and we need to prepare students to tell their human story, because ultimately that really is what art is about. It's a conversation between people. I'm convinced artists will embrace generative AI as another tool. I'm excited about that future, but generative AI is, I feel confident, not going to replace the human artist. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that. I had a bunch of questions that came to mind and I went to start typing them down and then I wanted to keep listening. So I hope we have time to discuss certain things at the very end, including, Barris Elgidson, who rejected the, what was it, the Sony Prize for photography recently. Anyway, yeah, let's move on, and I would like to introduce Orla Mcelroy. Hello, Orla. She is an MSc or an MSc student of Media and Communication Studies at Lund University, and she's coming to us from Sweden. So it's definitely evening there. Following her undergraduate dissertation on the social, economic, and political implications of pandemic media coverage while studying English literature at Durham University, Orla identified an interest in examining how media companies can seek to balance their ethical and moral duties with their capacities as functioning business models. Now, that might on the surface seem like it's not a creative topic, but it is. So thank you very much for being here with us, Orla, and I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay. From my end, you might need to turn volume up just slightly, but we'll see.
Great. Okay, so my name is Orla. I'm currently based in the south of Sweden, but I do have a BC connection as I actually grew up in Victoria on Vancouver Island, so not too far afield from Vancouver. So I'm currently finishing up my master's in media and communications at Lund University, and my thesis specializes on AI in news media. But through the course of my degree, I've done extensive research on the development, use, and social and ethical implications of AI across media as an industry and in our academic field, including on language generation models like ChatGPT and on Netflix's algorithm design. I previously did my bachelor's in English literature at Durham University in England, and I just want to emphasize, with the degree in English literature, I am not a scientist. I certainly cannot code. My interest in AI comes from a socio-cultural perspective, which is something that I will return to later. So to give you a bit of a run through what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start off by talking a little bit more about my research and what I'm looking into. Then I'm going to map the landscape of what AI in news and journalism is currently looking like and some of the AI tools that are being deployed currently. Then I'm going to run through this framework of applications, actors, and implications, having a further look at what AI is doing, and then talk about emphasizing AI as a tool before wrapping up with a little conversation about democratizing AI. The aim here is to share some of my findings and insights from key actors leading the integration of AI tools in news media and the journalism industry, with the hope that their reflections will allow you to engage with dialogue holistically surrounding AI and consider how AI tools can be integrated into your own creative processes or areas of expertise and interest. Due to time constraints, I won't be able to indulge on the full extent of my research findings, but hopefully you'll get a bit of a feel of what I'm exploring and gain a few insights. So to get started on my research draws on qualitative interviews with key actors in AI from 5 eminent global media news organizations and 1 nonprofit coalition. Participants included those from the BBC, the Associated Press in the US, Sweden's public service broadcaster SVT, Ireland's public broadcaster RTE, Al Jazeera, and Partnership on AI, which is a non-profit coalition working to establish responsible AI use across the media industry and beyond. So I sat down with these individuals and discussed their experience of AI within their organization, alongside their opinions and views on AI and its implications for the industry and beyond. In terms of my framework, I've been developing this framework for analyzing AI and other digital technologies through the lens of media studies. It goes through the stages: applications, actors, and implications, with applications considering the technology itself, how it's being used, actors, the parties involved in AI deployment and development, and implications, thinking about the considerations that have to be made when working with AI and the effect of AI in the industry beyond and regulation. This is very much a work in progress. My deadline is still looming for my thesis next month. So I'm very much open to feedback and thoughts, and I'd love to engage further about what people think about AI in the media space. So mapping the landscape. I think we can all agree AI is pretty much the buzzword of the year, though it's this massive term used as an abstract word applied across this massive range of technologies and functions. And I think at the moment, everyone will relate on the fact it feels like it's splashed across every headline, tweet, and certainly all over LinkedIn. There's a whole conversation separately to be had about whether this is an intentional abstract, which I will return to later. But so specifically, what does AI look like within the news, media, and journalism context? So news organizations have already been using AI for a while. What this goes to say is that AI's entry into journalism is not a hypothetical or an imaginary, or even a predicted oncoming event, but it's actively being used, developed, and deployed across news groups and the content that we consume as we speak. In an attempt to narrow down the abstraction that is AI in news media, the initial question that I opened interviews with was, how do you define AI? And I got some rabbit in headlight looks from participants after that question, but I think their definitions really offer some insight into how AI is being viewed within media. The first definition comes from AP, which is that artificial intelligence is the reassembly of human ideas, intellect, and structures electronically. Al Jazeera gave a little bit of a different twist, which is they're reinterpreting AI as automating intelligently. This is looking towards the idea that we should ensure that when we apply AI tools, we're doing so in a way that is a value add. We need to retain the idea that just because we can doesn't necessarily mean that we should. This also is an attempt to contextualize AI, as in journalism, we've seen two previous ways of digital disruption, with AI acting as the third. Those two previous ways being the introduction of the World Wide Web and then of social media, both of which completely changed the face of journalism and news media. And I'm going to assume that everyone here has at least some interest in AI, but you might be wondering, well, what's the point of looking in news and journalism? It comes down to pretty basic theories of media and communication studies. Obviously, I'm biased as a media student in the weight of the value, but I would argue that news infiltrates all levels of our society. It informs political, social, and cultural events. News reflects our society, and our society acts as a reflection of news. As such, the entrance of AI technologies into this space, and moreover, the disruptive and transformative powers of these technologies, demands engagement, criticism, and conversation. I think, moreover, through the lens of creative processes, the process of news creation and journalism is the act of turning information composed of facts and figures into consumable, entertaining content, which we can view to be in and of itself a creative process. I think the entrance of AI into this process with its massive disruptive potential can be examined by those from across creative disciplines and academic spheres or in industry spheres, and learn how AI can contribute. So there is, as I said, AI, wide range of technologies. So what technologies are we actually talking about in the context of newsrooms? Throughout the course of the interviews, there was a massive range of technologies mentioned and brought up, which I've tried to illustrate, the main ones in this word cloud. These are kind of the technologies currently in development or deployment at the majority of the news organizations I've talked with. I could go into all of these technologies for hours, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to make mention of two, which are kind of the most prolifically used at the moment. First being computer vision. This is being used particularly in archival, automating the archival of old audio and video tapes, so it can watch and listen to content, identify and record main data points, and provides metadata enrichment, which is useful for automating archival where the manpower just isn't available, and assisting journalists and editors to search archives and find footage and content. There's also an integration of this computer vision with predictive technologies, which is a really exciting area. The example I was given from Al Jazeera was of computer vision potentially watching footage of a content of a conflict, triangulating data points such as shot firing, human speech, aggressive interactions, and predicting events such as human fatalities that can't be shown live on camera, which allows editors to cut away cameras before the event occurs. Natural language processing, everyone's familiar with ChatGPT, is also being used to generate transcripts, subtitles, and story summaries, which offers great opportunity within the news space. So, what are the experts actually saying about AI? We have to appreciate the massive transformative and disruptive potential of these technologies. As AP emphasized, anywhere where words and images touch down will be disrupted. I think while we all appreciate the kind of classic jokes about AI, the robots are taking over, we also have to realistically confront and assess the potential of AI disruption and get ahead of it. AI is now an inevitable, and so burying your head in the sand is a fairly unrealistic approach. So you may be thinking, well, if AI is that great, why aren't we already integrating it? The obstacles to AI rollout in the media industry are obstacles that are shared across all industries and areas seeing potential AI integration. Cost and resource constraints are an immediate obstacle, because while bigger newsrooms might be able to afford these technologies, smaller newsrooms and freelance journalists have to ensure that they are selecting the right AI technologies with limited resources and optimizing for cost. We also see fear as a huge obstacle, with headlines telling people that AI is coming for their passions and livelihoods. And I think that prevents people from wanting to engage any further with AI or learn any more. Within many organizations, there's also a simple lack of pre-existing experience with the technology and a lack of staff available to be trained. As with many other creative industries, journalism is subject to a massive brain drain, as those within the realm of journalism and media who develop technical skills around AI or other digital technologies depart to technology companies on the promise of improved salaries and opportunities, and we're left without them in this field. So let's talk a bit strategy. As SVT emphasized, with the introduction of AI, there needs to be a preparedness of the fact not all projects will succeed, regardless of the time and money spent. I think while this is arguably understood within tech companies, it is not a way that news organizations are used to functioning and requires a massive attitude shift in order to accommodate. However, with the introduction of these new tools, we also have this great opportunity to teach new approaches and uses that seize upon responsible use of AI that approaches the technology ethically. Multiple mentions were made across the interviews to collaboration. We're seeing collaborative efforts between organizations and outlets that would traditionally be in competition in order to innovate with AI. Organizations like Partnership on AI exist to encourage collaboration and conversation in developing AI and regulation. Given the idea that AI is going to affect us all, they argue not only to bring news organizations together, but academics, companies, media platforms, and civil society, being me and you, into the conversation and ensure that we all have a say in designing the future for this technology and how it is used. So, as with any technology, new technology, there are certain considerations that have to be made, as not all effects of AI will be positive. As SVT emphasizes, there can also be a dark side. The considerations felt within news and journalism are largely similar to those felt across any organizations or areas adopting AI, namely labor, with fears that AI will replace and remove jobs, encoded bias. For example, Al Jazeera mentioned a potential reluctance to adopt AI by organizations in the Middle East, stemming from a belief that AI could be trained with a Western focus or bias, making them inapplicable to use within a Middle Eastern context. There's also the question of data use, with data often harvested from individuals not fully aware of the scope of how it be used and blindly ticking terms and conditions boxes, as I'm sure and I think most pertinent to the discussion of creative processes, the jury is still out on whether generative AI tools will prove a creative opportunity or a hindrance for artists. And finally, as one of the biggest issues facing the news industry, fake news. I'm sure you all saw this little photo down in the corner of the coat in the puffer jacket a few weeks ago. We have to become more critical that things may not just be true because they look true, as SVT put it. But arguably, there has also never been more need for subjective and trusted journalism at this time. As always, there is a flip side to the coin of fake news and AI's involvement, as AI can actually function to provide automated information verification and reduce misinformation. So let's focus on some positive effects on the other side of things. In terms of labour, well, some may argue that the potential for AI to replace journalists, there is also an argument that journalists ultimately have a unique vantage point in society and that AI will be unable to replace this. AI can act as a solution to the issues faced by many local newsrooms as well, filling a gap caused by dwindling resources and funding and sustaining an otherwise declining industry. Perhaps the most important use of AI, when used effectively and correctly as an additional tool, is in allowing journalists to focus on their craft, automating the repetitive, administrative, and frankly, boring jobs that have to be completed around the actual journalistic processes of writing and content creation. AI also promises journalism a creative boost. While we don't want to see AI writing for articles, it can be used to enrich journalistic processes and assist in work, providing editorial assistance, content, all different sorts of things. There is also something to be said for AI's impact upon emotional aspects and accessibility. In terms of emotional impact, we could train AI to be looking at the images that we don't want to be repetitively exposing humans to, such as violence, nudity, blood, guns, shooting people, all of the stuff that people don't necessarily want to be seeing on the everyday. We can also use AI to improve accessibility through generating subtitles. There was a discussion through my interviews about using deep fakes to generate sign language, which at a rate that human labour would not be able to, which makes content immediately more accessible. As with this quote from the BBC, done properly, with the caveat, this could really help people. And AP echoes that thought with, it could just make jobs so much better. So on to the topic of regulation. There is still a big discussion to be had around how we regulate the use of AI. Thought has to be made in the development of these technologies and ensuring that they are unbiased and ethically sound. Further, we should be transparent about when AI is being used so that audiences are aware to the extent of its involvement. Ultimately, ethical thought and engagement should be at the forefront in creating regulation, with consideration given to the broader and potential future implications of AI use. It's not illogical to be skeptical or fearful of AI. I think fear of the unknown is a basic human nature, and in fact, a degree of skepticism and criticism should be welcomed. However, effort should be made to not catastrophize dialogue around AI and its use in creative industries. The reflections from journalism and news industry leads emphasize the role of AI as a tool, the aim of reducing the administrative tasks and bureaucratic processes that surround content creation and allowing journalists to focus on their craft. Especially, I think, for creatives, AI is presented as this kind of big amalgamous blob coming for all of our jobs and passions. And part of that scariness stems from the intentional abstraction of the phrase AI. As such, we need to begin to break down this abstraction and examine AI technologies as individual tools designed for human use, not a strange, mythologized, magical entity on a mission to replace human life as we know it. If you want to read a little further around this, there's a great paper called Enchanted Determinism, Power Without Responsibility in Artificial Intelligence by Campolo and Crawford. So I think the most important thing to ask, especially as creative, but as anyone in fact, is how can AI work for you? I encourage everyone to begin thinking about AI tools that can be integrated into your own workflows and creative processes. While technologies like DALL-E and ChatGPT are incredibly impressive, they're not necessarily practical for everyday use and to a certain degree overshadow more useful and frankly, more boring or perhaps to rephrase more routine technologies that you can incorporate into your work and processes. Al Jazeera phrased this as AI is basically spell check plus, grammar check plus. We use Google every day, spell check and grammar check every day. What's the difference? I think an important thing to circle back to is that not everything needs to be automated. My interview with SVT, she quoted Marie Kondo, the kind of infamous Japanese tidying expert, on you should not automate the things that spark joy. Back to this idea of just because we can doesn't mean that we should. Following Ben's insights, democratizing may in fact be our own buzzword for this call. However, I think the fact that we've both brought it up does serve to emphasize the importance of democratization in this conversation. Given the relative novelty of AI, there is currently very little to no formal regulation of AI, with the current attitude towards introducing regulations seeming to lean into the whole plugging holes in an already sinking boat method. This quote from the EU really sums up my thoughts towards this, which is that key decisions on the regulation of AI development and application should be the result of democratic debate and public engagement. This is echoed with Hiden's thoughts that algorithms are as norms affecting people in their everyday life, but without people having the democratic opportunity to affect them. And I apologize to anyone from the realm of philosophy of law for this oversimplification, but the enshrining of legal regulation stems from a construction of social norms that themselves affect the interactions and conversations we participate in our everyday lives and routines. As such, the path to recognize legal regulation begins in the conversations that we have surrounding AI. I'm a big believer in encouraging multidisciplinary study of AI. A key piece in ensuring that AI use and AI regulation benefits creators results from the entrance of creators into the conversation surrounding AI and its development. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, I started with a degree in English literature and consider myself a firm member of the creative community. To be honest, growing up, I had very little interest in anything I perceived as sciencey or mathsy. However, I think the perpetuation of the idea that creatives and those from the humanities are in natural opposition to the realms of tech and science, and that the fields are inherently exclusive, only limits creativity and innovation on both sides. And it allows issues such as encoded bias and the misappropriation and misuse of AI to fester. As creatives, we need to encourage fair and open dialogue around AI, especially with increasing conversation around AI's intrusion into intellectual property and copyright, and the fear of AI replacing artists and creators. I personally think the best way to ensure development of AI accounts for the opinions and experiences of those in the arts is by inserting ourselves into the conversation. Ultimately, mystification and myth-making around AI allows AI developers and corporations to shrug ethical responsibility and legal liability. If we allow the justification that surrounds black box algorithms to permeate across dialogue around AI, then we lose the ability to criticize the technology and its development, as it's pretty much impossible to criticize or dismantle something you can't see in the first place. I think these quotes from my research really sum up a point on here, which is that an overuse of obtuse jargon adds as a method of gatekeeping, and it further fosters attitudes of exclusivity. As AP emphasized, we should be plain spoken and ask stupid questions. Conversations need to be had at the moment in ensuring that people are aware of how AI affects them, encouraging AI literacy and ensuring that educational resources are accessible and open. I personally think that the first step towards integrating AI tools into your own creative processes is to engage with the dialogue around AI and develop a degree of AI literacy. Events such as this one can act as a starting point for conversations around AI and how it affects creators and creative processes. And we should ensure that this conversation continues after the Zoom. So thanks very much for listening to me. In order to continue the conversation, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn or pop me an email. As I said, I'm still very much working on this research, so I'd be very keen to hear people's thoughts and engage a little bit more about this subject. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Orla. Wonderful. Do you want to just provide your LinkedIn, or will we find you if we just put your name in? You could put it into the chat even. Yeah, for anybody who's presenting, if you want to put any contact information in, we leave that up to you. So yeah, please provide Orla with some feedback and questions, and that's great. Thank you. Okay, we're making good time here. Thank you so much. We'll move on to Dr. Derek Jacoby. And if you don't mind, I'm going to use your words. Dr. Jacoby writes, after a decade at Microsoft, where I led teams in Windows system administration tools, and in Microsoft Research, where I worked on speech recognition, I returned to academia to complete my PhD at the University of Victoria. I thrive at the intersections between disciplines. My core background is in computation and management software projects, but I maintain deep interest in science, particularly biology, and I founded Canada's first community biology lab at the Victoria Makerspace. I presently lead a National Research Council funded project on geospatial analytics. And that is only a fraction of what I could say about Dr. Jacoby, but I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to taking you guys on a bit of a tour of things today. I started preparing this as a presentation and started preparing this as a set of slides and realized that I wanted to show you more things than I did talk to you through things. And so I'm going to do something that I would always tell my students not to do as they're preparing conference talks. I'm going to paste you the links that I'm going to show before I show them. This is going to result in all of you going and hitting all these links rather than listening to me, but that's okay because these are things you can play with. And one of the things that really differentiates the current AI activity, which I've seen about 2 AI winters in the time that I've been involved in the field. And so we're in this big curve with AI getting more and more capable each time we revisit it. But in mid-90s, late 90s, I was at Microsoft and really worrying that I was going to lose my career because I was developing repetitive stress injuries and decided I had to use speech recognition in order to really keep my career at this point. And I joined Microsoft Research to make that possible and have a team to support pieces of that. I had the experience of standing on stage with Bill Gates in 2001 at the Joint Conferences of Artificial Intelligence, doing a speech recognition demo and having this I thought really of, well, it's amazing. I'm here talking about artificial intelligence, but I'm having a hard time getting my voice recognized on a model that I trained, on a microphone that I provided. It was all just feeling so cumbersome. About a decade later, I left Microsoft and had the opportunity to work with Ray Kurzweil at the Singularity University program, NASA Ames campus. He was really talking about exponentials and it can even see it in my career in the AI industry, that decade of being very deeply at Microsoft Research in the kind of center of the AI field in that decade. 2010 went to Singularity University, kind of talked about exponentials and how quickly things were accelerating. The next decade brought us all the way up to DALL-E 2. This is just stunning to me, how much we're accelerating in our capabilities in terms of artificial intelligence. Reminds me one of the stories that from science fiction that absolutely love is The Long Slow Tuesday Night. It has this idea really just of how quickly things are starting to move. You can get married, start business deals, get divorced, crash businesses, all before midnight. And it really feels the more that things speed up, the more we're in this environment where the pace of things is not necessarily our human pace. It's the machine pace that we're looking at. And so I think part of what we're looking at with AI is we're looking at AI as development and getting caught up in the pace of how the technology is developing, but we haven't stopped to really make it serve us yet. Now I'm going to go from some really flashy examples of things that I'm sure everybody are looking at and dive down into a specific implementation of AI concepts that are not flashy. So DALL-E 2, we're all impressed with how you can generate images. And a year ago, this was 2D images, a propaganda poster depicting a cat dressed as a French Emperor Napoleon holding a piece of cheese. Amazing that it can draw all these out from words. Well, today, about a year later, we're doing the same thing with videos. University of Toronto team just published a paper 2 days ago called Linear Latents that are using text to generate full 4K videos. And these videos are initially amazing. I think the dancing fox down here is totally cute. It pulled it out. He's dancing on his tail, kind of grinding it under his left ankle or left foot, by the way. So it's still got weirdnesses, but it's absolutely astounding that we're getting to this point of being able to, through text, generate things. And as I go through the next little bit, I want you to think about the things that are being generated, because a fox dressed in a suit dancing in a park is by no means the artistic endeavor that actually putting on a fox suit and a fur suit and the video camera and creating your dancing fox for an artistic purpose would convey underneath it. We're simplifying and developing archetypes of things that we're creating by reducing them down to a short phrase and letting the model supply all the details in that phrase. I'm going to kind of leave that and talk about a use of AI that has formed most of the last of my past 5 or 6 years in geospatial analytics. And I'm going to give this example as a way of differentiating generative AIs from non-generative AIs. And it's not actually as clean of a division as you might think, as I hope in just a moment you'll see. So one of the main contributions in the field of remote sensing that I've been involved with in the last few years is AI-based techniques for atmospheric correction. What you're doing with atmospheric correction is taking a sensor on a satellite and trying to deduce something at ground level or bottom of atmosphere. But what you have is a sensor signal at top of atmosphere, TOA. And so you have to do a transformation to get what all the passage through the atmosphere will do to that signal. Heat rippling it, different light impinging on it, clouds diffracting it. All of these things modify the signal that you get by the time you get to the top of the atmosphere. And so what we're doing in doing atmospheric correction is using a neural network and feeding it a set of inputs that we've correlated to a set of outputs in ground truth, and it learns a model to associate the one from the other. It's not generative AI because we're feeding it an input and it's associating that to an output that has a one-to-one mapping from the input, but it is at the output side creating data that we don't have a clear set of rules for how they were created. We have a statistical associational algorithm that created them. So I put this, though, still in the category of non-generative. One that is generative is a poster that a couple of my students just presented this week on neural radiance fields. Neural radiance fields, or NERFs, are this really interesting concept that sprang out about 2 years or so ago and have just taken the graphics community by storm. What you're doing in the case of a NERF is creating a multi-view representation of a scene. Think about this for just a minute, and I'll show you an example here, but a multi-view representation of a scene. It doesn't matter where I am in that scene, I'm going to be able to view it as if I'm right there. Well, of course, this is exactly what we need for virtual environments, for augmented reality. It means that if I take a NERF of a scene and I walk back a day later and want to know if anything's changed, well, I just take a picture and I compare it with that NERF and everything aligns on top of each other and boom, no, nothing's changed. It makes change detection really easy, but it makes everything really easy to have this specific, this multi-view scene you can view from anywhere. Incredibly expensive to make them though. In that what you're doing as the process of making this is taking pictures from everywhere around the scene. This is a process called photogrammetry. And so in this image that I just kind of grabbed off of the web, we've got a shed, and we're running around this shed and taking pictures from everywhere. Part of the pipeline that the students and I developed over the last few months were to take the imagery collected from a drone, these aerial images, and push them through a couple pieces of software. The first being a piece of software called ColMap. ColMap is your piece of photogrammetry software, and what it is doing is taking all the views, all the areas, and solving a model for where the camera positions were. So based only on the imagery itself, we can place the view as being a view of that model. Once you know exactly where the camera images are, here is where we start to invoke the generative AI. Because if you wanted, for instance, in this picture, and just to confirm, I think everybody is seeing my mouse here as well as the image, good. If I wanted to take a picture from this point in space around this shed, well, I don't have a picture from this point. And so what I would really have to do prior to the invention of something like NeRFs is I would have to model everything. I would have to make a reductive model of this shed. And then in something like Maya, I would rotate it the 5 degrees, I would get to a new point, and then I would re-render it. What we're essentially doing with NeRFs is doing that computationally for every possible view on the basis of the light field data or the rays, what we would be rendering in that other sense, for every view interpolated at every point around here, so that our model of this shed is then a light field based shed that fills in all of the areas between the images. Now, you might be having a thought here, and we'll jump forward to the NeRF Studio piece here in just a moment. But you might be having a thought here that this still really isn't generative. You've got a model that you've really carefully specified. I've taken a picture from almost every angle, but it is. If in this view there was a section of that board that I couldn't see the edge of that had a Mary Love Sue and a big heart on the corner of that, my generative model would never invent that. My generative model is going to invent the archetypal view from that angle that matches the input constraints just as well as possible. So it is a generative model, but it's a very tightly constrained generative model. It's not going to hallucinate except for within the bounds of the constraints that we provided for it in the training of that model. But it does hallucinate. And so all of these concepts we talk about and think about hallucinations, they still apply here. It still is a generative model, just in a more detailed form, perhaps, than inventing a whole person in a scene. Now, let me actually jump out of where I am in here and show you a little bit of a demo of that and what a NeRF actually is. I think I'm a little bit out of sequence where I'm doing this, but I'm also a little bit behind on time, so I may skip on a couple of my links in here. What I'm running is a project from NVIDIA called Instant NGP. And what the Instant NGP project is a NeRF training package. And so you're watching a NeRF training in real time here. This fox head that we're looking at is made up of a bunch of images that were taken of an actual fox head hanging in an actual wall. And as we stand here and watch it, it's taking those images and building a model. And that model will allow us to view this fox head from any angle, any zoom level, and it's going to generate what this model should show the rays striking our camera lens at that angle in that position from any of those locations. Now, if I start training just with my images, my model's not very good, my model's not very good, and it's going to just be really fuzzy for the first little while. This isn't a fox I'd show anybody, but I let it keep going, and it's going to progressively get better and better as it refines all of the other views that it could be building that model from. Now, I talked about hallucinations still being present here, but being constrained. If I turn this fox around and look behind where I just happen not to have had very many pictures, I've got this fur ball behind his neck. That fur ball is not really there. What that furball is the generative model deciding in this area where I don't have enough constraints in training my model, that I'll choose the thing that's nearest by that must be filled with. And in this case, that thing nearest by has been a fox fur. And so this is my furball of fox fur that is a hallucination of the generative model-based NERF, neural radiance field, that is underlying this view. It's kind of neat how your hallucinations are constrained to the inputs that you're training your model on. So I'm going to take us away from the fox for a minute here, although I'm going to leave it open because we may come back to it in a minute, and show you the imagery that we collected from the view of the drones flying over the ECS building on campus here. It's really hard to see the impact of NERFs in a monocular view like this. This could be a movie of me moving around that drone, and you would have a really hard time seeing the difference until you get kind of the edges, and we get edge breakdowns and stuff that are plainly not just part of a movie, and until you start to see the perspectives that move around on it. So really the way to get a sense for a NERF being a representation of reality from any view is to throw a VR headset on your head. And that really kind of makes it striking that, oh yeah, I'm in the environment now. This is a representation from any angle that covers this. I'm going to speed up just a little bit here. I've used about half my time, I think, and am less than half the way through, and have some neat higher level pieces to get back to. And so I'm not going to drop into the open source tool chain that enables all of this. But I do want to mention that this is one of the things that is amazing about the progress that we've made in artificial intelligence since the late 90s, early 2000s, when I really entered the field, is that at that point I was at Microsoft Research in large part because a large industry research lab was the only place that I could work with AI. It was the only place we had the resources. It was the only place that there were people around me with the training to play with these ideas. And now everybody can do it in their bedroom. This is fundamentally enabling in ways that are just stunning to me. Even with ChatGPT, I run the Victoria Makerspace. It's kind of this motley collection of engineers and hobbyists and woodworkers, and so conflicts happen in the space, and one fellow in the space sent me the most wonderful email thread. A bit of a hothead. He tends to respond really abruptly when people break tools and things, and somebody had lost a tool on the lathe. And he sent me the email thread with, Derek, I almost posted this to the list. I usually would have, but I have a OpenAI account, and I asked ChatGPT to word this in a way that wouldn't get me in trouble. And what he actually posted on the list was this most amazing, polite, please don't hide tools. Here's how much impact it has on people. Here's what it did to me, and got engagement he never would have gotten if he flamed the list. We're already impacting lives with these AI technologies in such a profound way that turning off the regulatory tap is no longer an option because people depend on these AIs. Since my RSI experience in the 90s, and certainly since this fellow's ChatGPT experience, we're no longer humans, we're human cyborg systems, and supplementing our capabilities with the world around us. And we can't turn that off with a switch without causing serious human rights issues of saying, no, you can't have this capability you've built your life around. And it's just a matter of degree and who controls it. I'm incredibly inspired that control is becoming democratic through the lens of technology. This is a technological utopian view of it, that everybody can control the technology, but it is open in a very fundamental way that it wasn't some number of years ago. I'm going to flip on through a little bit more quickly, show you a couple more demos, and we may not have time for the full part of this demo, but you can capture NERFs directly from your iPhone. I'm going to show you a little bit different iPhone app at this point. I could go through that NERF app, but I've kind of lost time for that one. There's a commercial application, Lumo Labs, that is also got a NERF capture utility that's kind of interesting. So you can actually capture NERFs very in a very detailed way from your phone. I'm actually, though, going to show you through another app called Scaniverse that is not a Nerf creation app, but uses the LiDAR on the iPhone. And the LiDAR on the iPhone, in combination with images, allows you to do scans of objects in a very detailed way. But those scans today kind of look like a vandal thing. So I'm going to zoom in on my car. This is my car in my driveway, and pretty unassuming 2004 Jetta, Toyota Jetta wagon. But I don't actually have a hole in my roof where I forgot to scan from the top. And I don't actually have all of these bashed out windows where the reflections made it think that there wasn't a window there. And I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about the next generation of these tools that will not be just doing a point-by-point scan in the way my LiDAR currently is, but that will instead be doing my scan and then recognizing what is in that scan, and then building a model that is an information theoretic view of the data returned from the pixels in those scans or from the LiDAR responses in those scans and what it expects to be there. Because this is the way that you and I see the world. When I see my car, I don't have to look at every point on my car to know what it looks like anymore. I just see it, oh, that's my car. If I see a 2004 Jetta that isn't mine, I probably glance at it and go, oh, that's a Jetta. I don't have to think about it because I have this archetype of what a 2004 Jetta is in my head. And one of the interesting things about generative AI is that that archetype is what the generative AI is creating. And so the 2004 Toyota Jetta that I create out of my generative AI model is going to really be the most standard 2004 Toyota Jetta you can imagine, because that's how archetypes work, and that's the thing it's going to create. What this puts is the burden of creativity in a different place than it was previously. It's not how I execute that picture of a 2004 Toyota Jetta. It's where I place it, how I place it, what I'm using it for. And the capability that's going to let my scanner on my iPhone not present me a picture of a vandal beaten up car, but present me something much more akin to how I see a car, is this idea of being able to automatically segment or automatically label the things that are in front of me in this picture that my AI-enhanced phone in my pocket is picking up. So Meta recently released a Segment Anything model. And Sam is really, really freaking good at identifying what it is you're looking at in a picture and putting a label on that in a really detailed way. And this is the thing that we need when we're looking at a scan to be able to have the system identify, oh, it's a 2004 Jetta. I now know where all the lines are in that, where all the edges are, where all the model sits. And I'm just going to pick up those things that might be different. There might really, on my model, be a problem with the front grille. That's not an artifact. So I have to pick that up and make a difference against what is actually on my archetypal model of that car. But that difference, and looking at the world in differences, is a fundamentally different way of looking at the world than it is to have to create that model from scratch, and much more akin to the way that human cognition works in looking for differences in the world around us. We're not quite reptiles, where things that don't move disappear from our vision. But although my boyfriend says it might be sometimes when something I haven't cleaned up is still sitting there. But we are close in that we pay attention to those things that stand out and that are different. And generative AI models really are doing the reverse of that, of acting in a normative fashion and showing us just those things that we expect to see there. So to create art with generative AI models, I would argue that we must approach it differently. And our art comes from the meaning and the spaces between the actual generation of the image the model allows. So what we're looking at here is a picture of potentially the classroom of the future. This was a proposal to Northeastern University in the middle of the pandemic of how do we create a room to support remote technology education. And so it was an effort called GIRL, or Global Experiential Remote Learning. and had this idea really that a couple of instructors satisfying multiple groups of remote people could create a shared virtual space that had a lot of the same elements of a classroom, a well-functioning interactive classroom, but virtually. As we started to take some of the ideas about classroom spaces and move them into creation of instructional content, creation of creative content, we found our lab moving into a realm of motion capture. There's a couple of last summer students in a Rococo mocap suit, and we're on the verge of a couple of projects this summer that I'm really excited about in terms of merging some of the abilities of generative artificial intelligence to allow us to tell digital stories better. Working very closely with David Leach and the Digital Storytelling Lab at UVic, and have some spaces with students from both disciplines trying to break down silos between groups at UVic to use technology to tell stories. We're setting up a virtual production lab, really simple affair as compared to the grand industry affairs, but complex for a university environment. So what we have in the lab we're setting up using a piece of software called Oximetry and some LiDAR-based tracking cameras. We have some tracked cameras so that we can put a person in a scene pretty much anywhere and have that scene behind them be the stage against which they're set. Now, this works into this NERF discussion in a really interesting, detailed way, because remember I said that the main advantage of NERFs is that they are not view dependent. You can be anywhere and view that NERF and still have it pre-computed. This is exactly what you want for a virtual production setting, of course, in that you want to be able to move your camera around and have it appear as if your actor is sitting just exactly in that scene. And so there's a lot of activity in terms of using NERFs for the media industry. Luma Labs is one of the applications I brushed through and didn't talk about much. They've got a encapsulated NERF creation and display pipeline that's pretty cool. The other one that I'm anxiously awaiting is Voltinga, which I think I put on my list of links, but I don't see actually in my list of things on the screen. But Voltinga is super cool in that it uses two pieces of technology that probably already familiar with, or that I'm familiar with one, you're probably familiar with the other. It is based on NERF Studio as its technical creation pipeline, but then its rendering is sitting inside Unreal Engine. And Unreal Engine has really ended up in this place where it is the de facto standard for virtual staging at this point. So anything that's getting into Unreal is able to be put into this virtual stage as an object, as an actor, as the background scene, pretty automatically for our making the production pieces out of there. Well, automatically after the software is all in place, automatically from the perspective of the artist coming in and using the space. Enjoying in here having the opportunity to have people out of silos, and that we have computer science undergrads paired with our arts students in kind of this mutually facilitatory role, where it's not the computer science students acting on the arts instructions to complete a work. It's more of an exposition of here's what we can do you might not have thought of, and together exploring the capabilities of the system to see what kind of digital stories can be told there. We've got some really interesting outgrowths of this, working with Patrick at UBC and a group called the Sawmill. We've got a grant from the Canadian Experiential Work Integrated Learning Organization this summer, and we're going to get the chance to take about 80 students in our first year computer science introduction program and introduce them to some of the motion capture technology that Patrick Pennyfather's been working with at UBC. And having the ability to have UVic students in a studio in UVic in hopefully real time working on motion capture projects from the studio in Vancouver is just once again taking our virtual world and shrinking it so we can make connections with each other in more approachable ways. A bigger picture of this is that there are many, many stories today that are not being told. And one of the stories that David is most involved with is this project called the Climate Disaster Project, telling the firsthand stories of people being impacted by climate change. This has brought this project and the writers and interviewers associated with this project into remote communities that are really on the front lines of the climate battle we're fighting, and has been part of a shift in our programming on how stories are being told to really want to empower these remote communities. So we've got a couple of programs underway through the auspices of a nonprofit that I founded a couple of years ago, along with Yvonne Cody at UVic, called the Pacific Coastal Computing Association. And in the midst of working with some partners to tell stories of rural health equity, to tell stories of rural lifestyles, capture scenes of rural environments using NERF technologies, and enable these assets to be brought to virtual production stages to tell those stories. So these pairings of underlying technology pieces and the social applications to which we as artists have to bring the stories that we have to get told, constant interweaving. But I'm just thrilled with the speed at which we're moving in this environment and see the advantages of the advances in AI in terms of really unlocking human potential as being unprecedented in this time that we're living through. So thank you so much for listening to me through this, looking at through some of my examples here, and being a part of this session today.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. My goodness, we could easily have gone, maybe you need to do an entire session another time if you would want to come back. That was great. So the first, just right now, does anybody have any questions that they want to pop into the Q&A portion? Oh, thank you. The Daniel has posted the in the chat there. And I do have a question, the one from the beginning, which could be for anybody. This is it's a very specific question, though, because it's something I'm personally interested in. Is your reaction to, like I mentioned, the photographer Boris, who rejected the major international photography award? He submitted a photograph, a sepia photograph that he had made using AI, but didn't tell them, won first place, and then rejected the award as a protest. So I'm curious to hear what you, if anyone would like to speak about that.
I don't mind jumping in on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that story. It was picked up very quickly by the art newspaper and then the mainstream press in the UK. And I think there's something a little bit shitty about that protest, personally, because it's a sort of snarky, misleading thing that he did, isn't it? And it really touches on one of the things that actually is something that was very prominent in Orla's talk, which is about coming at it from a different angle, but it is about authenticity as well. I think that it isn't going to be easy to tell the difference between generative images, and it already isn't. It's going to get harder. But art and culture isn't empirical, and you can't boil meaning down to what it sort of literally is. Certainly not in the digital realm, because if you do that, it'll just be lines of code anyway, or ones and zeros, whether it was real or not, because like that's how it works, right? So actually what we need to develop a much more sophisticated take culturally on is how we track authorship and what we mean by authorship and what we mean by authenticity. And that's again, that's got to be a joint endeavor, and it's going to be a slow endeavor because, as I think Derek's talk demonstrated, which is a fantastic talk, it's really exciting, but I mean, the pace of change is incredible, and it's incredible on a technological level. The cultural stuff hasn't caught up with it yet. The kind of conversations I'm having with people who aren't directly immediately involved in AI on a day-to-day basis, like talking about something as though it might be about to happen. I'm like, it's happened, it's already happened. You just it's kind of like, this is like we're in a collective period of shock at the moment. And yeah, so I've gone a bit of away from where you started your question, but that's sort of, I think that's how I feel about it.
That's all right. We can venture wherever we want to go with this. Anybody else?
Yeah, if I could add, I think it's created a really interesting opportunity for dialogue, and there's been some really interesting conversation going on around where AI belongs in these competitions and how we value art. But I think there's also an element of trickery on the media side going on here, because if you actually read into it, the category that photo won in was like an open entry creative photography, where you're encouraged to use other mediums of art. And I don't think this detracts from the conversation that this has prompted, but I think the media has done a very cheeky thing itself by using this big attention-grabbing headline of AI photograph wins category and implying that opportunities have been taken from photographers, when actually, when you dig into it a little more, it doesn't make it right that he won, but there are some more levels going on that I think have been oversimplified in media coverage in an attempt to garner attention, which is in itself a broader conversation that's been going on around media and how they generate their headlines and attention grabbing thumbnails for a few years on. But I think that comes back to what I mentioned earlier about the perception of AI that's being put forth by the media at the moment as well, which is in no way beneficial to actually integrating AI in day-to-day.
That's a really good point, and it makes me think of the letter that went out from signed by a number of people, including Elon Musk recently, talking, you must stop AI. I wondered, Derek, what's your take on that? Because it's a kind of that's a sort of, Orla's just mentioned the kind of a confected alarm in the mainstream media, but what's your take as a technologist on the maybe I'm not reading it right, but the confected alarm in engineering circles?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And now, of course, in that particular letter case, in the Elon Musk case, cynic in me says that the fact that less than a week later he founded his organization to pursue AI aims, that it may not have been entirely independent that he wanted to sign this letter. There may have been bias there. But I think that is not true of the vast majority of people that signed that letter. And we're in this point in time that is both incredibly empowering and incredibly scary, and we've never invented a technology that doesn't have two sides to it, and this technology, more than most, in that it is rendering what is at the core of our identity very challenged in a very specific way. I have had a whole lot of years being a very successful, talented software developer. I have a lot of ego invested in my ability to create algorithms and take my internal vision and execute it in code. I'm nowhere near as good a coder as ChatGPT is now. In the main entry for most software development jobs for the last few years, it's been these almost programming competition-like questions, and you kind of have to so assiduously study those, like cramming for an exam, before you can pass an interview, that it's this artificial process. Every one of those can be answered better by ChatGPT now than any programmer on the planet, because it's the accumulated knowledge that went into developing that algorithm solution. Now, once you deviate off the core question, you get places ChatGPT isn't as good at, and I'm not claiming that there's no advantage to being a good programmer anymore, but it's the associational elements that you can make, not the formulation of the question. And I think we've got a similar thing happening in portions of the art world, that the technical aspects of the production of the art are no longer the basis for any of the evaluation of the impact of that art, because that technical production can happen automatically. And this doesn't in any way devalue the artistic contribution of the ideas underlying it. It, in fact, I would argue, is in some ways a democratizing trend in that it is allowing people to express themselves more effectively. But it's not something that can be put into a competition without telling anybody about it. There are different bases for evaluation.
Yes, and I mean, that said, there's another whole discussion around artists through history have been known to sort of be protesters in some way. And so this is there's a long practice of protesting. So I can see why he did it that way. And I appreciate you mentioning what you mentioned, Orla, because I wasn't aware of that side of it. So we do have a question that's in the Q&A, and we're at, what have we got here? We're at 1:25. Okay. I'll just ask this question, and then we'll just do wrap up after that, if that's okay. The question from Daniel is for everyone. AI provides tremendous opportunity to increase our capabilities and capacity as a species. This is tempered by the ways it can disrupt employment. How do we need to change how we think and the societal approaches to economy and work that let us take best advantages of the opportunities while avoiding the pitfalls and harms? And we've kind of touched a little bit, each of you, on this, but is there anything you'd like to say to that question? So I just summarize it as sort of how can we take best advantages of the opportunities while avoiding pitfalls and harms? And this is anything having to do with society, employment. I mean, it's a very open question. And don't feel like
I can jump in
Sure.
just quickly. I wasn't able to, obviously limited in how far I could go into depth in the presentation, but I really dug in a bit deeper in the actual research I've been doing around this idea of employment and labour, as obviously that is one of the biggest fears in regards to AI at the moment. And was comforted to hear from some of the organisations I talked to, especially the national broadcasters, because I think 3 of the organisations I talked to are national broadcasters. And one of them, RTE, which is Ireland's broadcaster, said that they feel as a semi-state organisation, they have an ethical responsibility to ease staff through the transformation and to not displace staff to a extortionate degree. Obviously, there's going to be some amount of changes in the way that labour is employed and how labour interacts with AI. But I think there is a responsibility of the organisations that are integrating AI to ensure that they're not displacing their staff. Obviously, I think dependent on the organisation and their positioning of profit and how much they value that over their workforce, that is going to be different. I think Ben might recall there was a bit of a controversy in the UK 3 or 4 years ago during COVID, when the government put out a series of ads about retraining creatives into cyber. And I know it's a dodgy conversation around retraining, but there is something to be said to consider how we can adapt our own abilities and creative passions around this new technology.
Yeah, I do remember that. It was an outrageous attack that's had kind of, I think, you know, there are other motivations going on there. It's a bit like the statements Rishi Sunak's been making recently about making maths education compulsory up to 18. But apparently not being worried about people's dwindling artistic literacies, as that's marginalized on the curriculum. One thing I'd like to add to that answer is it's not the first time the spectre of unemployment has been raised by a disruptive technology. About 10 years ago, I can remember there being a kind of fear about automation and the sort of first wave of artificial intelligence automation that was going to take jobs off of people, and robots are still primarily employed lifting extremely heavy objects and moving them from point A to point B. You know, you're not getting robot hairdressers or waiters as was predicted 10 years ago. And we've got an incredibly tight labour market. If those predictions about the disruption of previous technologies had been borne out, we wouldn't have a tight labour market, which we do at the moment. My feeling is that AI probably won't lead to the mass redundancies that some people fear. Partly because, as Derek said, you know, associational intelligence and that kind of higher order intelligence are human properties that will become, if anything, more important. And I also wonder if there isn't a degree of cynicism at work in talking up the capacity of these technologies to make people redundant, because although the general public might hear that story and think that's very frightening, if you're someone who views labor as a cost rather than an investment, you might be rubbing your hands together with glee and wanting to have a conversation with the person that's making that promise. But maybe that's the cynic in me.
The competitive landscape that we've created between businesses. I don't know where I fall on the success of universal basic income kind of discussions. They're all grand experiments, but at some basic level, right now, a lot of what's being displaced are jobs that fairly few of us want. If we look at the process of job displacement in an Amazon warehouse, for instance, we've had stories for years of Amazon stockers peeing in cups because they weren't allowed to go for a bathroom break, and other work practices like this. That's the job I'm just fine with a robot taking on, particularly in an international competitiveness milieu where the Western world has lost all our manufacturing capabilities to China. And that has to be restored. And the only way it can be restored in a way that preserves the type of lifestyle and work rights and everything that Westerners come to assume will be there is through automation and making sure that the jobs that people are sitting in are jobs that are most fulfilling for them. And that's one of the things that's most wonderful about the arts to me, is that nobody goes into the arts originally to be rich and famous. They go in because it's fulfilling. And if what automation and AI brings us eventually is the situation where we can all do more of what's fulfilling and less of the road to put the food on the table, then our technological utopian story has been spun. Now, I'm not sure we're on the direction to going there, but at least it's one output.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to wrap this up and really thank the three of you for being here and spending your time with us, your expertise. And I also want to thank the tech team for running this and members of the EMCoP organizational committee. I forgot to mention that I'm the EMCoP coordinator. That's my title. We look forward to doing more of these throughout the year. They will be every 2 months. And the next, just want to mention that this video will be available. It's going to be edited. We'll be taking out Orla's slides because it's a work in progress, but the verbal will be included. And this will be posted on the EML YouTube channel as well as the EMCoP website. So you can see it there. And I think that's kind of the last thing I want to say other than what's coming up next. So the next session is going to be a panel discussion. It will be Friday, June 23rd from noon until 1:30. We really want to try to include our European counterparts. And it will be an AI panel discussion organized by Christina Podner, who is a digital policy consultant who I believe lives close to Washington, D.C. So that is what will be happening in June. And thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to seeing everyone again.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a blast.
It was great. We could have kept going on, I think.
Absolutely. That was a lot of fun.
Every interview I did in the process of research, they were like, I'm so excited to talk about AI. I think everyone's just so excited to have a chat.
Exactly. Wonderful. Well, thanks again for your time.